program officer at the campus is able to hear me today, so I will speak to the I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the UWI Open Campus Auditorium. In a special way, I'd like to welcome Gerald, because Gerald and I have been in communication for the past few weeks, and we're very excited to be able to bring something like this to an audience in Dominica. We believe that thesis presentations and lectures are very important for our people because it gives us an opportunity to listen to intellectual conversations and to be able to participate in them. And too often we do not get enough of these opportunities in Dominica. And if the University of the West Indies Open Campus, as the premier institution for learning in Dominica, was not able to provide things like that, then we would have failed in our mission. So we're very happy to be able to collaborate with people who are doing research about Dominica and the Caribbean, and to be able to give them a chance to showcase what they've researched, and for the public to be able to participate by listening and discussing with those researchers based on what they've found out. So I'd like to welcome everybody here, and I thank you for being here. There are lots of places you could have been tonight, and you've come to listen, so we thank you for that. Welcome. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Gerald, who graduated from the St. Mary's Academy in 1986 and Clifton Duquesne Community College in 1989. He served as the president of the Dominica's Writers Guild in the 1990s. During that time, he won 2 international publications and a 1994 Gerald Walcott Fellowship to the University of Miami Caribbean Writers Institute. With an illustrious career in the British Civil Service, Touche honed in his skills in policy development across 4 government departments between 2002 and 2011. Trained at institutions such as the National School of Government, King's College, Cambridge, APMG International, the Open University, and the Institute of Risk Management, to name a few, Touche quickly moved up the ranks in the civil service. Touche was appointed Regional Economic Strategy Manager for the West Midlands region in 2003 and later served as the Senior Corporate Planning and Performance Advisor. In 2004, he became Justice of Peace for the West Midlands Commission area. Touche has deep interest in Caribbean political economy, a passion expressed by his regular commentary on several media outlets, such as the BBC Caribbean magazine. In December 2011, Touche was awarded the degree of Masters of Arts in International Studies, Globalization and Governance, with merit by the University of Dominica. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gerald Touche.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for being here this evening. And I'll start by saying everything that was said there, thank you for that, but I'm Dominican, I'm Caribbean, and I always say to people, everything I am, everything I have become, it's because of Dominica, it's because of my foundation here. You know, England didn't make me who I am. So that's why I had an interest in the CSME and chose to do my dissertation in the CSME instead of my favorite topic, which was the World Trade Organization dispute settlement, is where my heart really is. What I'm going to do briefly is just, it's not going to be a PowerPoint presentation. I've got just 4 slides there. Just going to introduce what we're going to be talking around this evening, and then we'll get into a bit of my dissertation topic. So, here goes. Right, so we're here to discuss CSME in global perspective, and what we're going to be looking at this evening, how did we get here to CSME? What are we talking about when we talk about CSME? So, in terms of context, I'm going to pull out some lessons from the West Indian Federation, moving on to CARICOM, and currently the CSME. I'm not going to give you a history lesson in the Federation or why it failed and how it failed, but I think there are lessons there, things that occurred there that are almost reflecting themselves again currently that we need to just be aware of in terms of how we move forward with the CSME. The cornerstone of my thesis really, it's about CSME offering the Caribbean, or CARICOM, new Caribbean regionalism. And I put the question mark there because it's something that's debatable and for us to discuss. And what do I mean by that when I say a new Caribbean regionalism. So we'll go a bit in detail as to what am I talking about, what do I mean by the new Caribbean regionalism. We'll also be looking at how all of this interacts in terms of the international political economy, the rise of regionalism and regionalization, increased globalization, and the threats and opportunities that are presented in that environment for small states like the CARICOM member states. And in all of this, I will throw in some of the findings and recommendations that came out of the dissertation. It doesn't necessarily flow in that order, it's all in there, and you'll get a feel of what I'm talking about. Before we go into the detail, this is what I really want to come to. What I want to do is just paint a picture in your mind, so that when I start to read this, you can kind of follow through what I'm talking about visually. Now here we have the 15 member states of CARICOM, along with the 5 associates at the end there. And individually, the islands stand alone and apart. And since the West Indian Federation of 1958-62, we've been trying to pull them together so that we could pool their resources, increase capacity, and build a Caribbean region. That progressed with CARIFTA in 1965. Then we had CARICOM set up in 1973. And currently, here we are, CSME, Revised Treaty 2001. Now, what I wanted to do is kind of imagine this line, which is really the regional process, or, in various sections. The West Indian Federation was defined as a British political construct. The CARICOM movement of the people like Professor Hines like to speak of a Caribbean, a West Indian nation, a Caribbean nation, so there's been a bit of a movement. And also we have all these processes that have been introduced to kind of carry Caribbean regional integration along since we started with the West Indian Federation in 1958. What I came up with is the idea of this being something like your clothesline. You've got a clothesline at home, and you have your laundry of your clothesline. Now, if we each keep concentrating on the individual pieces without strengthening this line, eventually, the more you put on the line, the amount of weight that's on it, eventually, this whole process gives way and falls apart. So I'm basically kind of arguing that where we are now at the current stage of Caribbean regional integration, the CSME stage, has to rise to the occasion and basically carry this whole integration movement forward. And we will go into more detail on this, but just keep this picture in your mind, along with the fact that this is not happening in isolation. While all of this is happening, we have a changing world environment. And the whole discourse is about individual nations trying to engage here, but don't have the resource, don't have the capacity, don't have the political clout. And that's why we've been attempting this for so long, so that we can have more weight in the international, so that we can attract more foreign direct investment, so that we can grow intra-regional trade and all these beautiful things. Yeah. So that's the picture I'd like to paint in your mind as we go through some of my findings from the study. Now, before I go in there, can I just say, feel free to challenge this and everything I'm going to say. Feel free to disagree with me 100%. We will still be best friends after that. Some people in here actually work in these areas and they know more about the topic than I do. So I'm here to learn, I'm here to gather information, I'm here to share with you what I've found through my research. I didn't make it up. So it's that kind of discourse that I thought bringing this here would help us to have that kind of discussion, in a realistic environment. Right. Effective regions and intra-regional trade. O'Brien and Williams tell us that as of 2007, the past decade and a half has witnessed an avalanche in the creation of regional trade agreements. There are currently over 170 RTAs in force, with most of those created since the establishment of the World Trade Organization in 1995. This, we are told, seems to correlate with the seemingly slow pace of multilateral negotiations. So regions are doing it for themselves, within themselves and between themselves, because multilateralism is not working as well as it should. Put in this position, it stands to reason that to be successful, or the most successful regions, will be those that command the greatest international political economic authority and grow their political economic structure, agency, clout, and diplomacy in order to be effective at commanding the type of influence in the international arena on behalf of member states, both in negotiations and in competition with other regions. Taking a leaf from the earliest political and economic thinkers of the Caribbean, who in the 1930s believed that a viable political and economic future for the territories could only be achieved if they were to forge a political union, to the more recent pages of the IMF, that the path to greater prosperity for the Caribbean lies in greater integration within the region and with the rest of the world, regional integration continues to be promoted as the preferred development strategy for CARICOM nations. However, according to Norman Gerald, it took CARICOM almost 20 years after its establishment in 1973 before it finally succeeded in 1993 in establishing a common external tariff and just over 50% intra-regional trade liberalization of goods. Critics argue that this has not, however, led to any significant increase in intra-regional trade, growing by only 23% over 3 decades. Welcome the CSME, meant to deepen and strengthen Caribbean regional integration while introducing full liberalization in the services sector and the free movement of factors of production. Gerald, 2010. But be warned, several Caribbean scholars over the years, from William Dimas, 1973, to Gordon Lewis, 1987, and Jacqueline Braveboy Wagner, 2008, all tell us that while attempts at deeper and more effective integration in the Caribbean over the years are not new, they have not always produced the planned or desired results. While scholars like Mansfield and Milner tell us that economic regionalism appears to be growing rapidly, and Herman Kazakhstan explains that regional groupings and regional effects are growing in importance in world politics. However, small nation-state regions like the CSME, to be effective, we must work to establish greater economies of scale, wider economic space, greater influence in world politics, and forge new and meaningful networks and relationships through strong regional ties and robust regional institutions with the authority and capacity to create political economies of scale. Not just economies of scale, but political economies of scale. We'll come back to that later. The UN Department for Economic and Social Affairs, in describing the challenges to be overcome by small island developing states and territories such as CARICOM member states, lists among other impediments that their growth and development is often further stymied by high transportation and communication costs, disproportionately expensive public administration and infrastructure due to its small size, and little to no opportunity to create economies of scale. So how are we going to achieve that? How are we going to seek to create these economies of scale? One of the few means open to the CSME to help create greater opportunities and economies of scale for CARICOM members is to build political economies of scale and operate a bit more, I thought, akin to the direction traveled for the establishment of the EU in 1993, from its earlier beginnings as the European Economic Community established in 1957. The concept, establishment, and dynamics of scale, we are told, are extremely complex. Combine this with the notion of the region, and it becomes clear that CSME needs a new way of understanding the region and the dynamics and power play of scale in the regional context as defined by Jamie Peck. And we will come back to how Peck describes the dynamics of power, play, and authority within economies or political economies of scale. The research shows that while the push towards Caribbean regional integration has been constant since the UN moved to decolonization in the 1960s, almost half a century later, the Caribbean is still not fully integrated, we know that, and has no timetable to achieve this. Analyzing the origins of and attempts at Caribbean regional integration, we find an interesting trend. Firstly, earliest attempts at Caribbean regional integration were unsuccessful and, according to Anthony Barnes, were rejected on the grounds that public opinion in the region was not yet sufficient to warrant the federation. The West Indian Federation was not a result of the dynamics of real Caribbean integrational desires, but instead was a colonial construct initiated by Britain as a mechanism to grant independence to its micro-state colonies. Just over half a century later, and here we are again in a similar situation. I think not, but Jacqueline Braveboy Wagner tells us that the decision to deepen the regional movement was pushed by external events, in particular, the impending establishment of a single market economy in Europe, and the global spread of liberal economic norms. This led to the 1990s development and later launch of the CSME in 2006. While CARICOM member states have implemented several of the CSME measures, equally there remain several outstanding. Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Dr. Kenny Anthony, while in opposition in 2008, explained this as a lack of regional will, direction and collaboration, which may well be leading to Caribbean integration fatigue, to use his own words. And Gordon Lewis tells us that there is a fundamental reason for all of this. He says, nor has there yet grown a sense of Caribbean consciousness in the regional communal psychology. It's been a while, since 1958. So CSME's greatest challenge yet may well be to foster and generate that regional communal psychology in all member states in order that it may achieve its objectives. A sense of that Caribbean nation that people like Walter Rodney and Garvey and Hines like to talk about. CARICOM integration has had to develop within the context of a rapidly changing global environment. This current phase, CSME, like past phases, finds itself impeded by global events, which is part of the reason for the Prime Minister Barbados Stewart announcing that it has been postponed in 2011. The global financial crisis, ensuing economic recession in parts of the world, particularly the US and the EU. Intricate and dependent linkages with Europe and North America have left the CARICOM economy very exposed and vulnerable to the impacts of the negative economic conditions in these regions. The Caribbean colonial past means that the region has always been linked to the international system, particularly through its mercantilist associations with the metropolitan capitals of its past colonial masters. Later political independence did not change much of this. The economic dependence on the political masters of Europe continued, and also to a lesser extent on North American benedictions. CARICOM members were also members of the GATT from as early as their independence, and continued their membership into the newly created WTO. However, with the establishment of the WTO and its new trade liberalization framework, the Caribbean soon ran into trouble with the organization with regards to its preferential access to markets of past colonial masters and North America. This challenge is still being grappled with by CARICOM today, as it contemplates policies and strategies to deal with the new WTO regime of trade liberalization and reciprocal trade. Losing markets for its agricultural and other commodities in Europe, the US and Canada, has made life more difficult for CARICOM citizens. The impacts of other international institutions and regional bodies such as the IMF, World Bank, EU, NAFTA, Mercosur have not been particularly helpful. While it is recognized by certain academics that it is Britain's membership to the EU which forced CARICOM into considering deeper integration, this was more of a defensive move in an attempt to protect itself from the potential losses. The loss of US potential market, also with diminished border trade and development assistance from the United States, equally pose further challenges to CARICOM. General shift in US geopolitical interests, coupled with the new WTO trade liberalization agenda, meant a double blow for CARICOM. Mercosur challenge of the preferential treatment enjoyed by CARICOM states on the European market resulted in a WTO ruling which deemed all preferential treatment received by CARICOM from Europe, the US, and Canada as non-compatible with the new WTO rules, and as such, all had to be phased out. Lack of drive and incentive by the US to follow through with regional initiatives that could assist Caribbean economic development, such as the CBI, the Free Trade Area of the Americas, saw the region again lose out under the NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, which did not include any CARICOM member nation. Being small states in the global system is difficult. How to overcome the general smallness of the 15 CARICOM member nations is the big challenge. The disadvantages facing small states in the international system is extensively documented. Disadvantages relating to issues of scale, capacity, influence, access, resources, natural vulnerabilities, and an international system that was not designed to be sympathetic to smallness. Attempts to mitigate or alleviate the challenges presented by size have not always been helpful, or do not necessarily lend themselves to the long-term survival or viability of CARICOM as we know it. Full integration then, therefore, seems an obvious alternative as a solution. For CARICOM, the size issue has always been the elephant in the living room. The smaller islands, particularly the OECS islands, have always felt and feared domination by the larger islands, while the larger islands or larger economies, as you know, there's no large, small islands in globalization, even if some of the CARICOM countries like to think they're bigger than the other. But in the big bad world, we're all small, right? And islands like the economies like Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica have never welcomed the idea of surrendering sovereignty with a regional organization to the much smaller islands. This legacy, which haunts CARICOM and CSME today, has roots in the collapsed Federation of the West Indies in 1962. We all know the history, I won't go through that. CSME also appeared to suffer from what appears to be a two-speed integration process, consisting of one group of nations that consider themselves ready for deeper integration and want to move ahead with full integration, the OECS countries, which I support personally, and the second group of countries who do not believe that the times or conditions are right at the moment, for example, Barbados and Jamaica. As I write this thesis, the OECS countries are proceeding with their vision of deepening integration among themselves, calling it a coalition of the willing. Also, the regional CARICOM Secretariat lacks the authority and institutional capacity and resources to challenge the sovereign of CARICOM member states. It is also not helped by the fact that CARICOM has no formal mechanism for engaging opposition parties in member states. And as such, elected opposition members, including the leaders of opposition of member nations, are not part of CARICOM heads of government meetings and not engaged in any other way in the CARICOM decision-making process in their capacity as nationally elected members of parliament. Now that point is a point that was drawn out by Dr. Anthony White in opposition. Interestingly, he was quite an advocate for CSME, and I think was the Prime Minister in 2006 when the rollout started, went into opposition and made this statement, and I'm a big fan of Dr. Anthony, so don't get me wrong. You know, but now that he's back, you kind of hope that we can bring all players in the Caribbean on board, because this is serious. You know, I mean, the EU got MPs in the EU who do not believe in the European Union or in Europe, but they elected MPs, and they go there, and actually they're there to dismantle it. They're actually there because they oppose it, but they have that right. They elected MPs. They're representing a section of the population. You know, we may not like who is in opposition, but you know, we have this view in the Caribbean that government consists of, you know, the elected members in cabinet, but you know, representation comes from being a member of parliament. The Caribbean, being a group of microstates and small economies, is challenged on several fronts nationally, regionally, and internationally, due to factors associated with international political, economic, scale, and power. This presents further challenges of conflicting priorities, policies, interests, linkages, and relationships for the Caribbean integration process. Both the UN Human Development Index and the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean briefing paper on foreign direct investment in Latin America and the Caribbean shows the Caribbean performing badly in terms of growth and development. CSME offers the Caribbean, or CARICOM group of Caribbean countries, an opportunity to address and overcome these challenges within the regional reinvention as proposed by Anthony Bryan, when he states that in the Caribbean, integration emerged as a response to overcoming the development constraints of small size. The new regionalism is an accelerated response to the new dynamics of globalization. The missing element in the new regionalism is the corporate integration of national companies, which outgrow their markets and accelerate the flow of goods and services, capital and finance throughout the region. Corporate integration is the stimulus that will push Caribbean regionalism into the new age. The Caribbean regional integration movement, from its conception as a colonial idea, throughout its progression into the 21st century to CSME, has been consistently dominated, shaped, and led by politicians, and with a very strong political ethos. And considering our part of the world, it's not surprising. You know, the corporate capacity and will and determination to get businesses involved. It's challenging, but businesses may well need incentives to get them more involved in the integration process, because politics alone and politics alone will not succeed in this process. If, as Clive Thomas warns us, that regionalization within the CARICOM framework emerges as more than just another preferred option, in the age of globalization, Caribbean regionalization is an indispensable necessity. Then one has to conclude that it is an indispensable necessity to include all sectors of society and economy. With such strong and urgent calls for the establishment of deeper integration through the CSME, it is difficult to understand how the political leadership can justify their actions to halt further progress indefinitely. And there I'm referring to the August 2011 announcement by CARICOM, the head responsible, Prime Minister Barbados Stewart, who made that announcement that the integration process have been delayed. And at a time when serious work and reconfiguration of CARICOM international relationships and linkages are necessary. So let's look more at these relationships and linkages and scale that I've been talking about. And that's just brief to introduce you to the idea. I can't go into this in detail. I only have 30 minutes. It is interesting to note that the region has always been an open region which engages in the international system and international trade. But strangely, not always to its own advantage. As Wagner puts it, indeed the region has traditionally been seen as peculiarly open and reactive to international systemic dynamics. The key now for CSME as the new regionalism is to move from being a reactionary player in the international system to one that is more proactive in not just engaging with the system, but influencing and proposing ideas to the interest of small states like the Caribbean. This will require forming right relationships and making appropriate linkages to create political economies of scale in the manner defined by Jamie Peck, when Peck says it is necessary to reject conceptions of scale as a series of hierarchical levels within which social processes are somehow shelved. Non-relational conceptions of the region as a literal delimited, demarcated, bordered portion of concrete space chopped out cookie-cutter style from the landscape underplayed and misrepresented the roles of inter-regional relations, conflict, and control. Similarly, conceptions of scale as horizontal slices of space reveal little of the complex ways in which scales are interrelated, combined, hybridized, and tangled. The latter calls for a relational conception of scale, which acknowledges that it is not scale levels in the absolute sense that matter, but the power-laden shifting relations between scales. Engaging in a way that you can gain leverage in the international economy, that you can have some clout, that you have the right partnerships. More than just the region, CARICOM, it is in the understanding of its role in the inter-regional relations within the wider hemisphere and the international system, coupled with creating relational scale that exploits the power of scale and managing the shifts in such a way as to maintain this power that will give new impetus for economic growth within CARICOM through the CSME. The old linkages with the mercantilist capitalist metropolis, as argued by William Dimas in 1973, may not have served the islands or CARICOM as well, since they were intended by the colonialists as an expansion of the metropolis trade. The structure of the islands' economies and their institutions thus developed to serve the metropolis needs, leaving us with the present-day challenges as observed by Winston Griffith, who says that their markets are too small demographically to permit the establishment of the optimum scale of modern plants producing exclusively for the local market, and their land mass is too small to allow for a diversity of natural resources from which to develop a diversified economic structure of production. However, within this concept of the new regionalism and the building of power-based relational scale, Griffith offers hope for CSME when he suggests and argues that neither a country's economic smallness nor a lack of a diverse natural resource base is a constraint on its economic structure of production. And I'm sure Mr. Douglas might have something to say to me about this after as an economist. Human agents, he argues, however, have made significant advances in the way they produce goods and services, which have become less dependent on natural resources and more dependent on knowledge skills. Persons with knowledge skills, assuming the cultural and institutional frameworks exist, will invent new products that use a minimal amount of natural resources.
Furthermore, if a country has an abundance of knowledge skills at competitive prices, it can attract foreign direct investment, which can help to diversify its economic structure of production. Thus, an important determinant of a diversified economic structure of production in any country, large or small, is whether the country has an adequate supply of knowledge skills at competitive prices. CSME, therefore, has to find new ways of doing business and usher in a new regionalism to participate in a new global society, as the then Prime Minister of Barbados, Owen Arthur, had said back in 2000, a man who was very enthusiastic about Caribbean integration and the whole regional movement. As CSME member states move from a world of independence to interdependence, and from preferential trade treatment to reciprocal trade arrangements, the old ways of doing business will not suffice. The world has changed and continues to change quite rapidly. CSME must build new linkages, establish new relations, and go beyond just creating new economies of scale to actually participating and engaging in the power play of shifting scales. Philip Nogueira proposes a Caribbean methodology for shaping of the Caribbean policy into the 21st century. One which confronts key economic issues on the horizon from a perspective of collective Caribbean community self-reliance, regionally, and recognizes global interdependence. In conclusion, I argue that the evidence suggests that the potential for CSME to achieve its objective is currently nascent, still budding, in development, waiting for springtime, but with the promise to grow exponentially with full implementation, as initially planned and anticipated for in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas in 2001. I therefore recommend regional institutional capacity building, the stepping up of a leader country to coalesce the CSME for transformational change, and a proactive and empowered regional authority to take charge and responsibility for delivering the CSME to full implementation. For in the CSME's full implementation is the mechanism by which the Caribbean can and must adapt to the changing global economic and political realities. There is no other offer on the table. There is no other way. At this stage, in this process, right here, this CSME must carry Caribbean regional integration and the hopes of Caribbean growth and development into the new age. Thank you.
We don't have a microphone because this room, the acoustics is good enough for everybody to be able to sit and just ask a question. So you can ask questions or you can leave comments and we'll do his best to respond. And so we'll have a little Q&A and engagement.
And can I just say, I'll try to answer the question, but everyone can participate, so feel free if you have a comment on a question that's being asked, or the answer or response I give to it, feel free to challenge anything and everything. This is, I'm not going to be a person, this is not the gospel.
Yes, I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation, and I was just thinking, and it's the fact that the only way the Caribbean can be integrated is when we cut off the labor strings of the slave master. The slavery knew these guys in the form of organizations like the IMF and the World Bank and the others. And unless that is done, we cannot get anywhere. Because they're holding us back. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I appreciate your comment and I know where it's coming from. But I hold the view, and I started off like from your position. But I guess it's this thing of actually studying the system and investigating it, because that's what you do within a master's thesis. You're investigating what's going on. And I hold the view that it comes back to the same thing of political economies of scale and building up the right authority to challenge and shape, because I think we need those organizations. I mean, it's a strange thing to be saying, but the IMF needs us, and we need the IMF. But it's how do we make it work for all of us? I mean, these things were set up in the past, to serve the needs
of the US. I mean, you have to, that's the World Bank, the IMF, post-World War II, they were set up to reconstruct Europe and fund, the whole regrowth and regeneration of war-torn Europe. It's taken on new roles, and these roles, every decade, the roles of the IMF have always shifted and changed. We know of its past performances. It says it's improved. But I respect your view, but I will view that I would rather, we're always going to need an institution like the IMF. We're always going to.
Because that's what we keep telling ourselves. That's why we don't move forward. That's why we keep telling ourselves. We want to piggyback on somebody. We don't need that.
Anybody else has a view on this?
Well, I'd like to know what do we need then? We need to rehabilitate and find our own way forward. That's what we need to do.
We're always.
Brains to do that.
Yeah, we do. But it goes back to what people like Dimas were saying since 1973. We were not created for ourselves. It's a strange thing to say. I mean, this world was a political construct. This new world that post 1648, the establishment of European nations and European nations going out to discover and claim the new world, and they created this, and the economy is here, just as Dimas said, to serve the metropole, to serve London and Paris, and our growth was not for ourselves, it was for them. Now we have to make that work for ourselves. We have to find ways to, this is the system we have, we have to find ways to make it work for us. And I think we're making progress. I think a lot of people will say to you, I mean, even the most radicals will admit that the IMF of the 1970s is not the IMF today. We actually at a stage where, look at the World Bank elections last month, where a Nigerian economist was actually considered, where Obama was almost forced to put a candidate who reflect ethnicities other than the white male. I think it's small progress, but it's progress. It's sending that message, and I think next time round we will see a greater challenge by the rest of the world with the rise of China and Brazil and the others to actually have greater representation at the World Bank. I mean, that's why we have new organizations like the G20. There are people who are arguing that the G20 has kind of circumvented the IMF and others. They're taking key decisions. And you know what's interesting with that kind of view? The same people who were saying, I don't like the IMF, and for all the reasons that